Welcome to Home Dad Chat, brought to you by the National At Home Dad Network. My name is Brock,
My name is Danny.
and we are here to talk about life as stay at home dads. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
No, I don't want much. I even love handmade crafts made of macaroni. Come on now, you should know me. Times I might eat too much. No worry about my weight, got the dad bod rocking on me. Sketches on my feet, cargo shorts look good on me. I'm a dad, that's what I do.
Hey everybody, we're back. Yes, I did say before we started recording that we were going to hit it, and then Danny made fun of me. So, the whole punch it Chewy thing got brought back up again. This wouldn't be a show without it, I guess.
If y'all don't know, we think that's hilarious. So that's really all that matters at this point at the beginning of the show. It's an intro. Yeah.
That's the home dad chat thing. Home dad chat. Punch it, Chewy.
Yeah. No.
And then get sued. And then get sued by Disney, like why not? Bring it all in. Oh my goodness gracious. Anyway, aside from all that, Danny, how was your week, man?
Good. Really good.
Yeah.
Had a good weekend, got out of town. Overall, everything was fantastic. Yeah, it was great. We went up to the lake and got on my father-in-law's boat and went tubing and took the kids out swimming and swam on the beach and
You
had
swam on the
s'mores
beach?
and
Wait, how do you swim on the beach?
you should see those kids. They bury each other. You got to swim
Oh,
out.
okay.
Yeah, you thought you had me, but
I really did. I was like, how are you swimming on the beach, man?
it's got to be more adventurous, man. Once you get out there, you'll figure it out.
Use your imagination when you're up north,
Right.
I guess.
Yeah. How about you? How's your weekend?
Week was good. Weekend was all right. We started school. We bought gold passes to Kings Island because if you buy them now, you get to use them through this year and then all of next year. So we get a few weekends of being able to go to the water park. So we went last weekend to the water park. We're going to do it probably again this weekend for Labor Day. And then we can go and ride some of the roller coasters and stuff and just we're working on it. The kids have never done a roller coaster, so we're going to start small and see where things go. But it's exciting because it's a new place, so it'll make things a little more adventurous for the coming year. So had that, and then I got hailed up to my hometown for 24 hours because everybody was going through my grandparents' house because my grandmother is in a nursing home. My grandfather passed away 3 years ago. And so everybody's kind of picking and choosing what they want. Yeah. And me being the family historian, I was really excited to go up there and see what little treasures I could find. And I came back with some awesome pieces of family tree lore.
Nice.
Some amazing documents, including original wedding certificates from my great grandparents. And I know that you're big into war stuff. I found a World War I 334th Infantry 84th Division book. It was that was one of my relatives served in over in France. And I believe he died over there as well. But it has an inscription from his sergeant to the family, and it was in the original shipping box. So it's got a 7-cent postage stamp on it, and
wow,
amazing.
Yeah,
just an amazing piece of. I didn't even know that our family even had it, so I'm super stoked to read through the book and see what's in there.
Yeah, definitely.
And then my family, actually not my parents, but my uncles and my mom felt that since I was the only person in the family that actually enlisted in the military and served for the shortest time I did, that I still that they wanted me to have my great grandfather's flag from his funeral. So I have that, and he served in the Navy as well. So that's so I've got these really cool military things. And then the last thing that I found was I found a volunteer enlistment into the Vermont militia 4 months before the Gettysburg War or battle.
Wow.
From one of my relatives, and it's a copy of his like signing it enlisted March 3rd of like 1863. Gettysburg took place in July 1st through the 3rd of that year, and so that was
That's epic.
just amazing. So
Yeah.
I've got some cool stuff to go look through in a box. I got a box full of cool things to read through and old photos to look through and try to put everything together for my family to have a really nice, piece of memory for people to look back on and learn about our ancestors.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. So excited about that. And also to like, my thing is, I always joke about this, is that like our family had money back in the day, like the person who served in the Civil War was given like 40 acres of land actually after they served. And I know we had family that did other financial things. So it's like, yeah, where did that go? Because I've never seen any of that. So, but that kind of also brings us into our topic of the night with our guest that we're going to have coming on, who's going to be presenting at the convention on household finance.
Yeah, good tie-in, man. Well done.
Yeah,
well
yeah.
done. Just way to circle back around. That was great.
It was a stretch, man, but I made it happen.
No, it was good. It was good.
But yeah, so yeah, household finances. You and I, we've talked about it before. We've talked about it with our wives being on the show before. But I think too, there's a ton of conversation around it outside of that, just with guys and the Facebook groups, Discord groups talking about it. Lots of dysfunction in it. Lots of trying to just how does this work? How does this balance? And so I hope that when we bring Mark Longbrake in, that he will be able to maybe give us a little more extra light into what he's going to be talking about at the breakout. And it's always good to be able to learn a little bit of new stuff.
Right. Especially about money. It's one of those things that I think the thing that I've noticed in my life is when I didn't have any money at all, started out broke, dead poor, we barely had food, right? We grew up, or I grew up specifically hating money and hating rich people, because I saw the people around me, and I lived in I didn't live in, but our land was in near a very affluent area in a very affluent county, and they all got cars for their 16th birthday kind of thing. And I hated it. And I went into my first marriage with that attitude of, if I get money, I've got to spend it. I've got to get rid of it. I've got to go buy this or buy that or whatever. And saving was nowhere near, budgeting was nowhere near my mind.
Yeah.
Because fortunately, now with my third wife, she's incredible with the budget, and she grew up saving and understanding what money does and how to make her money do what it needs to do and how to pay the bills and all that. And we're well off, I would say. I mean, we're doing very well, especially having 4 kids and starting out the first 8 or 9 years of having kids on a cop salary. Marnie's our savior.
There's a strategy that comes down to it. I mean, really, that's what it is. You gotta put down the foundation for it, and grind through sometimes, and you can look back on it later and be like, it was tough, but here's where we are. So like I said, I'm excited to see what Mark's got to say. So we'll do a quick break here, and then we'll bring Mark on and learn all about household finances.
Become a member of the National At-Home Dad Network, an organization focused on providing advocacy, community, education, and support, connecting with households where dad is the primary caregiver of the children. We do this through our webinar and podcast series, mental health support groups, regular online social events, as well as our annual convention. The National At-Home Dad Network is a 100% volunteer organization. Without the generous support of its members and the community around it, we would not be able to continue the work that we do. Becoming a member gives you access to past convention speaker presentations, the ability to vote for board members annually, and ensures that the organization's fees and bills are in positive standing. Oh yeah, it should not go unmentioned that there is some cool swag headed your way if you decide to become a member. For only $35 a year, your membership provides you with the exclusive content only we can generate, and you'll be supporting an organization that benefits families all around the country and world. By advocating for them, offering them community, providing education and guidance, and supporting them to grow in their parenthood journey. And one last thing, if you contribute $500 or more, you will become a lifetime member. Not only will you receive everything already mentioned, but also a certificate recognizing your status and an exclusive National At-Home Dad Network challenge coin with our trademark logo, Dads Don't Babysit. So, what are you waiting for? Become a member today. Hey everybody, welcome back from the break. As I stated before, we have our guest with us. Mark Longbrake is with us, and he's going to be presenting on household finances, the title of A Guided Discussion Around Common Points of Conflict Surrounding Finances. Conflict and finance? I mean, come on, really? Like, that seems like no brainer. I mean, come on. Welcome to the show, Mark.
It's good to be here, guys.
I think it's the thing most couples fight about the most.
Agreed.
Is finances. I think it's
They
one
do
of those
and they
things.
don't. And there's a lot of fights that people think are about money that actually aren't about money.
Well, we'll get into that in a little bit then. But before we do that, some of us don't know.
Curious.
Some of us don't know much about Mark. I don't know if we've met in person I feel like the past few conventions for me, like I'm just running around with a chicken with his head cut off. So just take a moment to tell us, Mark, a little bit about you and your family.
So I've been a full-time stay-at-home dad for 12 years since my oldest son was born. From the day he was born until now, I've been a full-time stay-at-home dad. I have 3 kids, 12-year-old boy, 10-year-old girl, and a 4.5-year-old boy. So right when my daughter was heading off to kindergarten so that I would be, like all my kids in school, we got pregnant with the next one. So I didn't then start it over again, and have always had that. I currently live in Connecticut. I grew up in Seattle. I've lived in, all over the country. I went to college in a small school in Michigan. I worked in DC for 3 years. I went back to grad school at Ohio State. That's where I got my PhD, and that's where I met my wife. I got married to her. She was finishing up her MD and her PhD. And so she got matched after medical school with Washington University in St. Louis. So we moved to St. Louis, and we're in St. Louis for 7 years. And then she got a job at Yale, and that's what's brought us out to Connecticut.
Man, you
Cool.
have journeyed across the country.
Some travel.
Yeah, no kidding. Where was the small school in Michigan?
Albion College.
What was it?
Right, Albion.
Oh,
It's
Albion.
right smack dab in the middle of the state.
Yeah, I've been there. I wondered if that was where it was.
It's a tiny little town. It's just like on the highway you get off, and the only thing there is the college.
Yep.
Halfway between Ann Arbor and Kalamazoo.
I know it well, actually. I grew up in northern Indiana, so I know where that is. So yeah, that's awesome, man. And are you a Buckeye fan? I know you're wearing the OSU hat.
Yeah, I mean, I was at Ohio State for 8 years, working on my PhD. And at the time, I was also, when you're a PhD student, you also teach classes. When you teaching classes for undergrads, how can you not become a football fan? Also, the first year I was there was 2002, and that year they won the national championship.
Oh yeah.
And so how could you not kind of become a fan along the way?
It is definitely an exciting school for football, that is for sure. So that's cool, man. And so you're in Connecticut now, and you said your wife is at Yale? Is that?
Yes, she's on the faculty at Yale, but she's an MD and a PhD, so she spends time seeing patients.
Okay.
She's a neurologist that specializes in treating patients with multiple sclerosis. So she does MS research, runs clinical trials on MS patients and new drugs that are coming out for treatment of MS.
Oh wow!
But she sees patients and then she does research.
Okay. And so you've been a stay-at-home dad, you said, for like 12 years.
12 years.
So 12 years. I mean, that's quite a span of time. Danny's been you've been what, 16? Is that what you're
14.
at? 14. Yeah. So what has the 12 years been like for you? Has it been smooth? Have you dealt with what would you say is some of the difficult things you've dealt with?
So I was, it was the decision to become a stay-at-home dad was easy for me, right? My wife was this MD, PhD, like on this track to be super successful. For her to take time off for her career was like just not a thing. And I was an economics professor. And like, I'm like, I can take some time off and then go back and teach night classes or something. So the decision to become a stay-at-home dad was easy. The transition itself was a little bit rough for me, not as hard as it is for some, but I definitely at first was very much the, you get asked the what do you do question, right? And I'm like, well, I'm a professor. I have a PhD in economics, but right now I'm staying home with my kids.
Okay.
And then that morphed into over time, 3-4 years in, probably 3 or 4 years in, it kind of morphed into I'm a stay-at-home dad, but I also have a PhD in economics. Right? Like that was the introduction. And then by about year 6, it was just, I'm a full-time stay-at-home dad, period. Like that was the journey I went on. And the National At-Home Dad Network and the HomeDadCon played a huge role in helping me kind of make that transition from I'm this other thing to saying, no, this is my job, this is my role, this is my career, essentially. And all of the other stuff is secondary at the moment. And that doesn't mean that when my kids go back to school that I can't readopt some of that identity and whatever. But for now, if somebody asks me what I do, I'm a full-time stay-at-home dad, period.
So what was your first convention you went to, and how many of them have you attended?
First convention I went to was in Raleigh, North Carolina, at the Children's Museum, right? We were in the back of the thing. And then the second one was the hurricane one.
Yes.
where it poured rain, and it was like
just walking down the streets from the venue to like the hotel, and it was 6 inches of water because the system could not get rid of it. I remember that clearly. I'm like, I brought a raincoat. It doesn't matter. I'm soaked just because it's up to my knees when I'm walking. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, and I've been to, I think, every convention since except for 2020, right? Because there wasn't a convention.
Well, we did online, right?
And so instead of doing that, I already had that weekend. My wife had already kind of taken off, and I had all that stuff done. And so I went out to visit one of my buddies who's a stay-at-home dad who lives in Denver. And then 2 of us went out and played golf for the weekend. So like we kind of did our own mini, like, we're not going to do the online thing. We're still going to, and at that point, getting away from my kids after we'd been locked down for like months. It was to negotiate with my doctor wife to let me even travel during that period, which was
that's a whole nother negotiation all itself. Aside from finances, that's a whole nother conversation for sure.
That's also 2 big parts, I think, of that journey that I see that most of our stay-at-home dads go through. One is you eventually own it. You get to however long it takes. Some people do it immediately. I mean, they're ready. This is what they want to do. And others of us take a few more years, and then realizing that you need to get away from those responsibilities. That's 2 major milestones, I think. And I'm glad they were both well done in your journey so far in this life. Yeah.
And at the same time, I don't want to make it sound like it was just this nice little easy thing. Like I've battled depression in my life. I've been on medication. I've been in counseling throughout, and becoming a stay-at-home dad, the first couple of years, I mean, it's isolating. I didn't know anybody. We just moved from Columbus, Ohio to St. Louis. We knew nobody in St. Louis. There was no family there. There was no friends. It was literally us just moving in, and all of a sudden now I've got a kid. And I mean, you're stuck with that kid day after day after day after day. And I'm like, oh, you can go to the zoo. I'm like, yeah, so I can be by myself pushing a stroller at the zoo. Like it doesn't change the fact that like I'm by myself.
Right.
And so that took several years to develop the network of people around me and get involved in the groups. And like, and I went to my church, and my church had their mom's group. And it was like, well, am I welcome or allowed in that? And they did a great job of kind of welcoming me in when they figured that out. And so then I became the dad, like that was sitting on the floor with 6 kids crawling on me. Well, they're talking about breastfeeding and all of this other stuff. And I'm just like, so I'm a part of the group, but you couldn't develop those close kind of friendships just because like you couldn't.
Yeah, definitely.
And I got saved in the middle of that by I randomly ran into another at-home dad at the Science Center in St. Louis, like randomly. And he came up to me and was like, I'm a stay-at-home dad. And like literally we were the only two in there with our kids in this room. And we just struck up a conversation, and then we started having like he's like, let's have dinner one night a week or one night a month or whatever, just get away from our kids. And he was the one that invited me to the first HomeDadCon, like introduced me to it. And I was like, oh, I'm all about that. Like, get
Who
me
was
out of
that?
town.
Who was
Cool.
that?
Brandon was his name.
Brandon Cole? No, that's not who.
No, he was. He only went to a couple of them, a couple of conventions, the two Raleigh ones, and then he went back to work. And when they had their second child, his wife ended up staying home, and he went back to work. So he stopped. He kind of dropped out of the stay-at-home dad world.
Does he live in
Mhm.
Kansas City now?
No, he was in St. Louis.
Okay.
The whole time.
Interesting.
Still
Okay.
is in St. Louis. Well, I mean, I say St. Louis, and St. Louis
Yeah, it's
County,
big.
and there's more things, and so I don't know if it was actually St. Louis.
He's the
Unimportant
magical
detail.
unicorn that just came into your life and then disappeared.
I mean, I kept in touch with him I still keep in touch with him, still get Christmas cards and stuff from
Oh,
him. Because
cool.
I mean, that was a period of time in both of our lives when you needed a friend,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was a friend, and it was a connection that we had that was something that, that was surprisingly important. Just having
Oh, yeah,
one
it's so
friend
important. Yeah.
that I could, and once a month, just leave my kids at home and go sit down and have dinner with, and say, like, we could complain about diapers, and we could complain about kids, and we complain about getting awkward looks at the playground, right? Like all those things that
All
we've
those
all
things.
experienced, that if you go and hang out with other guys, you don't get the same kind of thing. And that's what HomeDadCon does in a weekend. But then to have that kind of regular
Mhm.
thing all throughout the year of people that can kind of do that. And I imagine that's what I'm going to forget what it is, but the Home Dad Lounge or whatever
Yeah.
kind of fills that role in some ways for some people.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
Yeah,
You're
the
not
dad
wrong.
lounge.
Yep.
we've got a group in Connecticut. We've been doing once a month, kind of getting together for dinner with a bunch of kind of
Mhm.
primary caregivers is kind of the way we put it. So there's some single parents in there, and there's some who aren't
Yeah.
necessarily stay-at-home dads, but they're the primary caregivers for their children and face the similar battles. So
Yeah.
we've been doing
The
that.
the mental health support groups that we do are the same way. It's just, this is the group of people that you like you said, you can get in. A lot of times there isn't as much of a support group feel as it's just everybody doing okay. All right, well, let's just hang out. Let's talk about, whatever we might. And a lot of times you interweave that stuff that you talked about, like no sleep, or diapers, or whatever the grind of the day is for this job. And it's really, really important to find that. Even like you said, if it's just one person, that's like a lifeline. It's your one way. I can
Yeah.
survive if you just don't leave.
Yeah, that's kind of what
It really is.
that's
Yeah.
what, like, we've got kind of going on with the Cincinnati Dads group right now, because I've started doing every other Thursday like gatherings where we're just getting together with a bunch of dads. And it's really interesting because like there might be like one or two guys who are married, and then there's like 3 or 4 guys who are like going through divorces and stuff. And so it's great to get those guys together, because they really need like people to talk to who are going through this same thing, to be able to just share ideas and things like that. And then the guys who are married are just there to support them in whatever ways we can. And that's so important. Like, that's the thing that Danny and I talk about all the time, is that like you need a mentor in a men's group. Like those are necessities.
One of our second or third kind of Connecticut dinners, this guy showed up, and he sat down. You could tell he's the gregarious, kind of friendly. He's the Danny, right? Like he just sat down and he was talking to everybody. He was doing all the stuff, right? But you could tell that this was a guy who was desperate for connection. He'd been stuck at home with his kids. His partner was a high-powered, like, doctor type person who wasn't around as was supportive, but like he's like, still, I've got nothing. Like, I'm stuck with these 2 kids. I feel just stuck. I feel whatever. And we started telling our stories, and he was just, I mean, you could just see him like going, oh my gosh, like that's my life. Like that's, and he hadn't had that kind of connection before. And he had 2 young kids, so like, 1 and 3 or something. So all the diapers and all that kind of
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
And I'm a little past that, but I've been through it, right? And so
Right.
it was just great to kind of talk through that and be in the place where now I'm like feeling like I have a little bit of experience in this
Yeah.
Yeah,
that I
definitely.
wish that somebody had done for me back when my kids were that age, and which the Home Dad
Right.
Network did start doing and fall into place. And and it took a couple years to find it, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and speaking of experience, you're coming to HomeDadCon to talk about your experience with finances. I'm just kind of curious, like, what uh what has that journey been like for you? Is that something that you have always been kind of like the f- the front runner on, or the person who's in charge of that, or how did that kind of conversation come about? Like, what? And not, I don't want you to share too much of what you're going to be talking about, but I'm just kind of curious if you can give us a
So
little peek behind the curtain.
so home finances, right, are always a little bit weird. Everybody gets people say, "Oh, home finances. Oh, he's going to talk about budgets." Right. Or, oh, we're going to figure out how to put our money in the right envelope so that we can do the
Oh
things,
gosh,
or stay out of credit card debt, right? Or whatever the thing would be. And I was like, but
snowball.
for me, it's a different thing. It's a different question. The question I really want to look at is kind of the how to think about money, because I'm an economist, and so the economist in me, like, finance and economics is different. Economics is much more cerebral in a sense. The finance is the nuts and bolts, or accounting is the like actually moving the numbers around. Economics a little bit more thinking. So the question that it brought up to me was this idea. And here I'll ask you guys this question and see, just to exercise your brain a little bit. So imagine that I know it's the end of summer and my kids haven't
Yeah.
gone back to
I
school
got
yet, so my
brain
brain's a little
left.
bit scrambled. But
I had to wake up the hamster real quick there. He's sleeping in the wheel.
so imagine your buddy calls you up, right? And he says, "I'm cleaning out my garage this Saturday or in a week. I'm cleaning out my garage. I'd love to have you come over and help. It's going to take about 2 hours, right? And you come out, help me out. We'll clean out the garage, and then we'll buy pizza and beers, and we'll sit and hang out." Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing, same basic situation. Buddy calls you up and says, "Hey, I'm cleaning out my garage next Saturday. I'd love to have you come and help. It's going to take about 2 hours. I'll pay you $20 an hour to help me." Are those two things different
Yes.
to you? You
Yeah.
think about them very differently, right?
Mhm.
Even though they effectively are the same, right? Both things cost your buddy about $40,
Yep.
right? But our minds treat them as two radically separate things
Absolutely.
because we put money into the equation,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? The second you add money, all of a sudden everything gets weird,
Yes. I would be offended. I would
right?
just straight. I would be like, "What? No, you're not going to pay me. What are you talking about?" I would be upset.
Right. But if he offers to buy you pizza and beer, you're like, "That's cool,"
Yeah.
right? But
I
what's
think it
going on
varies.
there?
I think it varies, that whole, like, two different scenarios. I think varies on where that person is at. To me, I'm thinking in my head back from when we really were in like a dire position of money. And yes, it does seem awkward that your friend would offer you to pay you, but at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, like, that $40, there's something. I mean, I could pay a bill or whatever type of deal. I mean, I'm gonna get the time to spend while working with him, but that money will help my family out. Whereas, the other side of somebody's like, well, I don't really need the money, type of deal. The pizza and beer sounds great because that just means I get more time to
Right.
hang out with you. So yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
I can see both sides of it very
But it's
clearly.
right. And my point is essentially that when you put money in, it just changes the way that we approach the whole thing,
Right.
Yeah.
right? And people have different relations to that. And there's some people who have a relationship with money that's very much like, oh, they'd be like pizza and beer, like, well, why don't you just throw me $20 and we'll get something cheaper, whatever, right? Like, there's different people have different ways they respond to things, but just that idea of how do we think about money and how does that change the way that we do things.
Mhm.
So here's another little thing. And again, I'm not really stealing anything from my presentation. Just
Okay,
this
good.
is the type of stuff that I'm going to get into, right? Like these ideas of thinking about this stuff this way is you guys have all, I'm sure, all of us as stay-at-home dads Your kids haven't finished their lunch, and there's that chicken nugget sitting there on the plate, or there's that quarter of that peanut butter jelly sandwich, or whatever it is that you feed your kids, right? It's sitting there and you're like, my kids wandered off. They don't want to eat it. I'm looking at it and going, I don't want to waste this food. So I'm going to eat it rather than throw it away because I don't want to waste it. Well, that decision that you're making there shouldn't be about money, right? By saying, I don't want to waste it. I don't want to waste this money that I spent, right? We're making that a money decision when it's not. It should be about calories and about health and about like.
Danny's shaking his head.
No, I'm sorry. You're wrong. I'm sorry. I know you're right. I know you're right. But yeah.
But my point is, if you look at that decision as a health decision about, am I actually hungry? Do I actually want those calories? Do I want to eat that? We would answer it potentially radically differently than if we talk about it as a money decision, right? As I'm spending money on this, and that money, well, in that case, the money was already spent. You can't get it back.
Right. Eating the chicken, eating the chicken nugget does not put the money in your pocket.
You go in the trash. You're disposing of it either way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I remember. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I remember one of the first summer jobs, I think, or construction jobs I had was framing, and I was working with a guy, and he had a half box of nails just sitting over by the door, and I walked out and I said, "You want me to get that?" And he said, "Yeah." And his second in command kind of said, "No, we need to worry about that." And the boss said, "If there was a $5 bill sitting on the step, would you go and get it?" And the guy, "Well, yeah, of course." And the boss like, "Yeah, that's $5 worth of nails." And my brain exploded. I mean, I was like, "Oh my God, it is." How, and it was the amazing realization that, exactly like you said, that money means so many different things than the value of a thing. Like, oh, it's a box of nails, or it's a pack of chicken nuggets or whatever. It's that, oh, no, we have to go pick up the money. Of course we'll stop and pick up the money. Right. And that's what it made me think of.
When you put money in, it changes things. It just changes the way that our brain functions. It changes how we look at things. It changes all these things. And so it then shows up in arguments or whatever, in families or those kind of places, right? So like, my family celebrates Christmas. Not everybody does, but my family does. My wife's family does. And luckily, we treat Christmas the same way. We both grew up in families where you got lots of presents at Christmas. It wasn't like one thing. It was like lots of things. And like, if you only got one thing, it was a problem. Like you had piles of things. That was the way. Even when my family didn't have any money growing up, you got piles of very cheap things, but you still got piles of things. I had a buddy who grew up in a family where you got one thing. That was just the way it worked. You got one thing. And his wife grew up in a family where you got lots of things. They would have fights every Christmas because she would give him lots of things and he would get her one thing. Right. And it would be things like, why are you wasting all of this money on me? Buying me all these things. I don't need all of this stuff. Why are you wasting all these things? And she's on the, you don't love me because you only got me one thing.
Right.
That is a conversation piece that took place when my wife and I went through premarital counseling. Like the people that we went through counseling with asked so many great questions. And one of the questions they asked is what's Christmas look like for you? And it was interesting to talk about how that worked and how we were going to do it. Like, did we want to keep the same tradition, or did we want to somehow change it to make it our own, that kind of deal. So yeah, that is a very real scenario that doesn't get talked about a lot of times, and then blows up into, like you were saying, like a big fight.
But is that fight about money in the sense of like,
no,
is one person right and one person wrong?
No, it's definitely not about money. It's about perspective.
Right. Or it's about like looking at it and saying that the way that they're doing it is different, but that doesn't mean that their way is wrong and my way is right.
Correct.
Right. But thinking about it in terms of what's actually going on, rather than saying, like, we're low on money this year and you're going to spend a ton of money on Christmas buying me 15 presents. And like, it becomes this thing instead of like, what's going on actually behind things that
Mhm.
that when we think about it in terms, in that case, again, if you're thinking about it in terms of money, you're maybe missing what's actually going on, that there's just different ways of doing things that aren't right nor wrong, but just different.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So the breakout that I'm looking at is home finances, in the sense of like, yeah, we're going to talk about money, but I want to talk about it more in the sense of how we think about it and how we can see how money affects the way that we deal with all those things. Because
Okay.
we can talk about whether you should have, like, you should have your own account and your wife should have her own account, or whether you should be getting allowance from your wife or not, like all those kinds of things, like, but those are all individual, and they're all going to be affected by how you think about money and how your partner thinks about money. Because if you think about it relatively similar, you're going to have a pretty easy path through all of those
Yeah.
decisions. And if you don't, it's going to be a giant disaster.
Mhm.
And then finding the places where there are those frictions is the big deal. And then looking at them and saying, instead of saying, oh, you're right, I'm wrong, or I'm right, you're wrong, saying, oh, we're thinking about this differently. Let's understand that neither one is right nor wrong, and come up with how we are going to do this together, right?
Mhm.
Or how we're going to understand that. So that's the, in a nutshell, kind of all the things,
Yeah.
the direction that it's going to go.
Mhm. Cool.
I think too, you see conversations like that in the discussion forums from time to time too, and it, like, I would imagine when you're looking through some of those, you got to be like, all right, like, have you taken the time to just sit down and just talk about like where each of you are coming from, and just all of the outside things that, like, the experiences, like, what did you experience growing up, what did you experience growing up, what matches, what doesn't match, and or what do you want to keep and what do you want to throw out? Like, as far as like, those things that you have been taught or you learned, kind of deal. And every time I see somebody post something about the friction that they're dealing with their spouse or partner, it's just like, I feel like the same way you are. It's like, it's not so much a money thing that you should be talking about as a perspective of what brought you to what brought you to that point, to where here you are now standing toe to toe talking
I,
about what, like, this crazy situation that's more than just, dollars and cents.
yeah, and I'm specifically, I deal with money because as an economist, that's kind of the thing that you look at, that kind of side of things. But this idea of saying, I'm having a fight with my wife or with my partner or whatever it is, or we're having not necessarily even a fight, there's conflict, frustration with the way they're doing things,
Sure.
that often what I've found in my relationship with my wife is that the times there's those kind of conflict, it's because she's not doing things the way I want them to be done, or the way that I prefer, or the way that I
Mhm.
choose. And being able to stop and step back and saying, well, is it wrong? Is the way she's doing, is it wrong? And there's times when it is. There's
Well,
absolutely times when it is. If you're washing the dishes, you have to wash the top of the plate and the bottom of the plate. You
Mhm.
can't just wash the top. And my wife's like, but you don't eat off the bottom of the plate. I'm like, but you stack that plate on top of the other plate.
you're giving Danny an
Don't
aneurysm
eat
right
at
now.
Mark's house. Okay, I got it. I hear you.
So in that
But
case, there's a
yes, it
right
is.
and a
There's a
wrong,
right and
right?
a
Like,
wrong. Yeah, there's definitely a wrong way. Yeah, yeah. But and like you said, but when it comes down to money, finances, budget, whatever it might be, that is a lot of times with. I mean, for my wife and I absolutely don't handle the money because of my view of money. And Brock and I actually mentioned that, but in the intro before we got you on, I'm just, I hate money. I hate it. I want to get rid of it. I don't know how to save it. When I get money, I don't want to put it in. I know I want to get rid of it. And that's why I don't do the budget. My wife, on the other hand, she loves, I don't even, she doesn't love money, but she knows what to do with it. She sees it as a tool that she's using to get to where we want to be, kind of thing. And in my opinion, I'm wrong and she's right with that. I think in that case, yeah, because that's the way it is. But we haven't really ever had any issues about it because I understood what she knew that I didn't know. and
Right.
that I'm willing to say, oh no, obviously you need to handle this. Right.
Right.
So money's never really been a fight for us
Right.
because of that understanding. So I think that makes sense to me, what you're saying.
Yeah, no, and absolutely, like the bigger point about money, period, is that like you should be talking about it or
Mhm,
talking about what's going on with this, that you have that discussion with your wife to
mhm.
say, this is the way I feel about money, or this is how I worry about things. And at the same time, like if you're the kind of person that, like my parents were the kind of people who they would buy a car for cash and drive it until it literally broke in half, like till the frame literally snapped where you couldn't repair it anymore. Like that was, you bought something and you used it until it was dead.
Mhm.
And there's other people who get a new car, lease a new car every 2 or 3 years, right? And if you're from one side of that and your partner's from the other side of that, like there's a lot of room for conflict there, just because you haven't talked through what's going on and how do you feel about these things and how do you think about them. And so then it becomes this fight about money, or you're spending too much or you're doing whatever, when that's not really what's going on.
Mhm.
And so the conversation, having that conversation to really talk through where you are and where things stand, like, and that's not even about, well, should we have this budget here, or should we put this account here, or should we do this or that or the other thing. And so in my family, my wife still does the day-to-day bill paying, because that's something that she's very detail oriented and very on top of and takes care of all of that kind of stuff. Anything that involves investment or taxes is my responsibility, because that's the bigger stuff. That's
That's,
a
yep.
bigger like thing that you have to work through and deal with a bunch of stuff, whatever. And so she'll collect all of the stuff and I'll get this packet of stuff at tax time, and then it's my problem to deal with. So that's how we've kind of divided up the responsibility.
Yeah. And that sounds exactly like, well, not this, we didn't do the same thing, but that's what Marnie and I did. My wife and I did. I said, okay, I can't handle any of that. You got it. And she is the perfect one for it. But I could see how for you, especially in your background and your doctorate, sir, that would be exactly where I would expect that you would want to be, because that's kind of the larger things that are, from what I know of it. I'm not an economist, but that the long-term effects of what you do, as opposed to that day-to-day, oh, we need to buy another pencil. Yeah, that's fine. I'm talking about the taxes for the year. We need to look at the annual, growth and what have you. So that makes sense for you.
Yeah, and the problem becomes when you have two people in a relationship that are like you, in terms of the, oh, here's all, we'll both just spend everything, and then like, and so then there becomes
Yes.
a different whole set of ways of like, okay, then you have to look at and say, like, you've admitted that like the way I think about money is probably not the best. And so if
Mm-mm.
that's the case, like you have your wife is very much there saying like, well, I have a better way, and you're you're smart enough
Mm-hmm.
to say, well, then
Yep.
you deal with it.
Yeah.
But but you're lucky enough to have somebody that can do that. If you didn't have somebody there that was doing that, then there'd be a lot of extra work that has to be done to think about things and move through things. And
Absolutely.
so it's tricky, but that's where I'm going. That's
Yeah.
the idea.
That's the elevator talk, or the elevator pitch. Is that what we call it? Yeah. That's the
Yeah.
elevator pitch
And
for
there's
your
a bunch
breakout.
more. There's a bunch
Yeah.
more stuff. I
Oh,
can
I'm
go on
sure.
for hours.
No,
Sure.
and that's great. And I think that bringing in that conversation to the convention is just a nice like it's something that doesn't get brought into breakouts and things like that, on an annual basis. So it's nice to be able to bring that in, have the conversations, be able to get, like, you're asking questions to, you're not just, seems like you're not coming in just to like present a bunch of information. You actually have these questions to really like get people thinking about the different, ways to look at it, so that, they can walk out of there with, the necessary tools to be able to go home and be like, so I went to this breakout, I got to hear this, like, talk about, conflict and finances,
Mhm.
and I just want to have a time where we can sit down and I can, kind of give you some bit of what I'm talking about, and maybe that'll help us to talk through what we're dealing with, kind of thing. And that's my hope, is that, the guys that come to the convention go back home and they're able to have
Right.
those tough conversations with their partner or spouses about what they're dealing with, and hopefully it turns things around to where some of maybe the unhealthy things that are going on, that they turn around and become healthy things, and it moves them in a positive way, with their relationship, with their family. Good example to their kids on how, because that's the biggest thing. Like the way that we as parents, like, process through things and show our kids that by example is so important for them as they become adults, to be able to see those things as well. That's the one thing my wife and I constantly talk about, are like, our parents didn't tell us this, or we had to learn this on our own, or I wish my parents would have told us, or even better, I wish these schools would have actually spent some time like teaching these things to us, which is a whole nother story. So yeah.
My plan is to, give an example like that, give a situation, and then let people discuss it, and then kind of see where that goes, and then present another way of thinking about things, and kind of let some conversation happen so that people can see things. And it's interesting. I was thinking about this, and I was going through all of this stuff and figuring out, what do I want to say? What do I want the takeaway to be? What do I want people to walk away with? And that idea of, like, you need to be specific, like you need to have a conversation, an intentional conversation about these things, so that, like, that's kind of essentially the most important thing. And then I realized that, like, like, this is about money, but you could have a breakout that had the same takeaway that was about sex.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. That was
That
about
makes
any
sense. Yeah.
sort of area of conflict, that like, a lot of these things that I'm saying, like, you replace money with sex, and you could have similar kinds of conversations that need to have, because, right. So
Yeah.
there was even, like, and that was making me think even more that, like, this is the direction I want to go in terms of thinking about this, because that's tools that are behind and underneath things. It's not the stuff that's on the surface, right? Like, whether you have joint checking account or you have separate checking accounts, right? That's a detail, but, like, what's the stuff that's going on underneath?
Mhm.
That's what I
Yeah.
want to kind of get at, and help people to start looking at, and having exposing it a little bit, so that we can actually go in and start, like, let's talk about what's actually going on, rather than just the stuff up here.
Nice. I like that a
Definitely.
lot. I like that a lot. We keep coming back for the convention being a career development conference kind of thing, to where you're learning to be better at your job. And a big part of our job is that relationship, with our partner, whoever that might be, and that need to be able to communicate with them in all the different ways. And I love it that you're bringing this to where we can look at it, and like you said, it could be for other subjects, but for money in this case, to where we can sit down with them and say, oh, I realize this, or I want to know if you think this, or whatever it might be, however that conversation goes. And to be able to reach that point with our partner, so that then we don't have a fight about, like you said, the joint banking account, or the budget, or whatever it might be. So that's great. I think that's good value, man.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be just another one of those pieces to for everybody to put in their toolbox. So excited for it for sure. Well, we're up against the clock on things. This was an awesome conversation. I had a feeling it was going to be a good one, and so hopefully this spurs people on to look for this in the program when they get it, to see if it fits into their what they want to go experience. But Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show and talking with us, and I'm looking forward to getting to hang out with you here in just a few weeks.
Yeah, we're less than a month.
Yeah, I know. It's coming along.
It's coming.
That's
I'm
what
ready.
we're all excited about. Yeah. I had to say the whole song, "My bags are packed. It's time to go." Like, I'm just not leaving on an airplane. I'm leaving in a car, but still.
Yeah.
Everybody else is leaving in an airplane that's coming. But yeah. Well, hey, thanks for coming on again, like I said. And yeah, we'll talk to you all next week. So have a good one.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Good night, everybody.
I'm a dad, that's what I do.